This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hey, we made this.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey!
Hello and welcome to Shipwrecked and Comatose, the Red Dwarf podcast here on the We Made This podcast network. My name is Mark Adams and I am your regular host, and we're doing something a little bit different today. We are looking at the Red Dwarf RPG Sourcebook, which does mean that the show is going to be a little bit different. I have recruited two nerds to talk about role-playing with. First of all, hello Ollie Kenton.
Hello.
And hello to Martyn Allen.
Hello.
So you two are my kind of recruited nerds because you both like Red Dwarf and you both like RPG games. So welcome to the show. Are you ready for this?
Ask us again in about half an hour.
Yeah, I'll go with Ollie there. We'll see.
So this RPG is actually quite difficult to find because it's long out of print. It was printed in 2003 and it only really had one run before the company called Deep Seven lost the license, and it hasn't been printed since. So I'm not saying this would be definite, but we do have a Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod. If you messaged us on that, someone might be able to help out anyone who didn't have a copy of the Red Dwarf RPG Sourcebook. Not for sure, but, you know, if you need help, maybe you could ask us. That's all I'm saying. The way the episode is going to work is I'm going to do a quick hello to Ollie and Martyn, and we're going to talk about the usual officer's exam, and then we're going to have a quick chat about our backgrounds with RPG gaming. Then we're going to have a look at the system itself, what we think of the system, and its strengths and flaws. We're going to follow that up with a discussion about the source book itself, whether or not it's good as a source book for the system, regardless of the quality of the system. Then we're going to talk about the Red Dwarf touches and how Red Dwarfy it really is. And finally, we're going to talk about character generation, and we've all come up with a character. We haven't told each other what we've created, and we've all come up with a character through the RPG's character gen system, and we're going to compare and contrast what we've come up with. So boys, are you ready to get in Starbug and head to the dwarf?
Yes.
Aye, Captain.
Right, so I'm going to go with Ollie first for no reason other than I did. Ollie, so this is your officer's exam. It's questions about Red Dwarf and your experience with the show. When did you first discover Red Dwarf, and what is your first memory?
Oh, God. I don't know that I watched it when it was originally broadcast. I think I first saw it about season 3. Am I right in thinking it was first broadcast in 89?
87.
87, so I would have been 8, so I definitely didn't see it first time round. I think I first saw season 3, and then watched everything from season 3 onwards. And then I think I watched seasons 1 and 2 much later than that. And then when season 8 came out, I just went there, no, it's lost it, and stopped watching.
How about you then, Martyn?
I think unlike Ollie, I grew up in a household where my parents didn't really care what I watched on TV. So I started watching it from the very first episode. And I remember a lot of Red Dwarf for me is kind of feelings rather than definite memories, because I was very young at the time. I was around 8 or 9 when I started watching it, and I remember the feeling of watching an episode and then going in to school the next day and discussing how many times the word smeg had been said with my classmates. So it wasn't so much the Red Dwarf itself, it was more the kind of the naughtiness of the language and the fact that there was only a select few of us in the class that were allowed to see it, so everyone else would kind of be like, oh, what happened last night, kind of thing. So yeah, I started right from the very beginning. I've got to say I'm rather like Ollie in that I kind of stopped around. I think it was maybe around the time where they introduced the non-Claire Grogan Kachansky into it.
That was Series 7, yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, who the heck are you? And where is Gregory's girl?
She was, wasn't she? She was Gregory's girl?
Yeah, she was. Well,
Fuck.
kind of, yeah.
That reference has gone completely over my head. What's the Gregory's girl?
Gregory's Girl was a film in the 80s about a guy who like fell for a girl. He was called Gregory. She kind of wasn't Gregory's girl. She was like the friend that I think he then realised actually, oh yeah, I should have been like wanting to be with you all along. She wasn't the kind of like Gregory's girl who was like this girl who he lusted after all the way through. She was like the more kind of bookish, far more interesting person that he should have been interested in from the very start of the film. Claire Grogan, I was like, and I had a bit of a crush on Claire Grogan. So yeah, I think I was probably around the same time as Ollie that I kind of lost interest, and it wasn't until you asked me on this podcast that I kind of looked into Red Dwarf and saw that it's had this kind of massive revival in the last few years.
All the Dave stuff.
Yeah, and like movies, and I was completely having moved to Sweden as well. I don't even have access to Dave, so yeah, it came as a complete shock to me that had happened, and it's kind of got me a little bit more interested in it again. So,
if it helps, I'm in exactly the same boat as you two. I was obsessed with Red Dwarf up until I still liked it by Series 7 and 8, despite Chloe Annett replacing Claire Grogan. But then I didn't watch any of the Dave, and we've decided to stop me from, like, for this podcast, I'm not going to watch any more episodes of Red Dwarf until we kind of hit that in the series, and then it will be kind of like a fresh outlook. But I really want to watch them now, and I can't.
Not to dump on Season 7 as well, because Season 7's got some of the best episodes in. I thought I'd actually stopped watching it at 7, and then now it's come on Netflix. I've just binged a whole bunch of Season 7 stuff, and yeah, I think Gunman of the Apocalypse, isn't that Season 7 as well?
Series 6.
Series 6, right. I have been jumping around 6 and 7.
So we'll move on to question 2. Ollie, what is your favourite episode?
Ooh, there's so many good ones, isn't there? The second Ace Rimmer episode is fantastic. Gunman of the Apocalypse I love. Oh god, there's so many. Yeah, there's kind of odd ones, but again, going through the Netflix list, I was kind of going, oh well, that's a good one. I'll have to see that. Yeah, that's a good one. I'll have to see that one. That's a good one. I'll have to see that one. Yeah, all the ones with the polymorphs, Rimmerworld, the Waxworld one.
Are you just going to name all of them one by one?
Yeah, there's quite a few, to be honest.
How about you, Martyn?
I think I don't know the name of one of them, but you'll probably be able to tell me. The one that I do know the name of is Better Than Life.
Yes, wonderful.
Which is when they kind of introduced the kind of holodeck version, Red Dwarf's holodeck.
That they access via bicycle helmets.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I love about Red Dwarf. It's these kind of established conventions in other sci-fi that they go, okay, now how can we make it the most ridiculous version of that we can think of? It's just gonna, and it's got that nice mix of those kind of like visual gags, like, bicycle helmets, but it's also got the, they still kind of deal with the same questions in a way that things like Star Trek, which are obviously more serious in some ways, try to deal with, but they still manage to hit that. I think that's one of the strengths of Red Dwarf. They through the comedy, they still manage to actually address some of those things that the more serious sci-fi tries to as well. So Better Than Life, and the other one is, now I don't remember the name of it, but it's the one that is the alien ripoff. Is it like a Vindaloo monster or something? There's something that's
the chicken Vindaloo monster.
Oh, it's series 3 or 4.
Yeah,
Damn,
with
what's it
the weird
called?
DNA recoding machine.
There's one where it's very like Alien, and they're filming from the alien's perspective as it's trying to hunt them down.
And they form a group called Clitoris.
I didn't remember that, but of course they did.
Was it the Committee for the Liberation and Integration into Society of Terrifying? I can't remember what it is.
Well, you remembered a lot more than me. I just remembered Clitoris.
Yeah, but it's that one.
Damn, I can't remember the name of it.
I think those are my favourite episodes. Any episode where it took something that was in another sci-fi show and it gave it the Red Dwarf spin. Those were the ones where it really kind of hit home with me, and I just found myself laughing along because, as I said, I was in a household where I could watch pretty much whatever I wanted, so I'd already seen a lot of the films that I probably shouldn't have been watching at that age.
Has that reflected in your household now that you're a dad?
Absolutely in the opposite direction. So it's just one of those things. But yeah, those episodes, the ones where they take something that's established in kind of sci-fi canon and they go, let's make it Red Dwarfy. Those are the best ones for me.
For what it's worth, it was the Committee for the Liberation and Integration of Terrifying Organisms and Their Rehabilitation into Society.
You were so close, Ollie, with
I was
that.
pretty close. Google got closer.
Did you look at what the name of the bloody episode was while you were at it?
I did not.
Oh, right. So, Ollie, favourite season. What is your favourite season of Red Dwarf?
Oh, that's tricky. I think probably 6.
Yeah, that's mine too.
I think that was kind of like the peak if they'd got the Red Dwarfiness down and the actors were so thoroughly comfortable in their characters. And, yeah, a lot of good episodes.
How about you, Martyn?
I think a lot of my Red Dwarf memories are probably from earlier seasons. So I think the one that really stuck with me was the one that Better Than Life was in, which I think was just series 2.
Series 2, yes.
I think it's the one that ended with the parallel universe.
Yep, when he got pregnant.
Yeah, and I thought that was a really funny cliffhanger ending. I think that series was probably the one because didn't it introduce Crichton as well?
Very briefly, he was only in one episode, and he was never supposed to come back. But yes, it was in series 2 where Crichton was discovered, where he got those dead women that he'd been serving for years, even though they were skeletons.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons I like it was because it was a setup for the kind of expanding of the Red Dwarf universe. They introduced a lot of the things that they then kind of continued. The first season was very kind of small in scope, probably because it was the first season of something. They didn't know where they were going, if they were ever going to get a second one. Whereas the second one seemed to establish a lot of things that they then kind of ran with in further episodes.
I think you're right. I think there was a real confidence in Series 2. Look, we did well in Series 1. We've been given a second series. Now we're going to kind of really push it. I think you've definitely got something there.
Yeah. So for me, that it was Series 2. Not to say that there aren't amazing episodes, but I think that's the one that's probably stuck with me the most throughout the years, with my hazy recollections of it all.
Okay, so we are halfway through the officer's exam, and so far you're both doing pretty well. So, Martyn, who is your favourite character?
Gosh, that's a toughie. They're just all such horrible people. It's got to be Crichton. It's got to be Crichton. From the very first time he tried to say Smeghead, that was it. He'd won me over. His constant admonishment of the other crew members, kind of struggling with his own inner programming to be able to survive with these crazy people that he's stuck on a ship with, and the fact that is it Robert Llewellyn, the actor?
Robert Llewellyn, yeah.
Yeah, I think he's got excellent comedic timing.
I met him at a conference. We had a chat about electric cars.
Oh, very nice.
I am quite jealous of that.
Yeah. He just seems like out of all of them, I think Crichton's my favourite, definitely.
Ollie, what about you?
I don't think I've got a favourite. I think the strength of it almost is that it is an ensemble, that they all work so well together. I don't think any one of them would be as interesting a character without the others to kind of rub up against, so to speak.
That's a very diplomatic answer.
Yeah, that in essence, that's why I went for Crichton.
Yeah, I think that's also why Kachansky's reintroduction rubbed so many people up the wrong way, because it's like you almost had the kind of all of the established character interactions had already been thoroughly kind of established by the point that she was reintroduced, and then it's kind of like, you're taking this very well working group of characters and then adding in a new character into that, and suddenly it's like you've then got to establish relationships between her and all of the established characters and how they all work together with her. I think that was always going to be a bit of a tall order, no matter who you introduced.
I quite liked it from like I say, I lost interest, but I quite like it looking back on it from the point of view of the fact that it was a bit of a sausage fest in terms of the actors, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, totally.
True.
It was. I think they needed to shake that up a bit. So I think what I'm going to do is, after this, having now read a bit more Red Dwarf, I'm going to go back and I'm going to watch it again, and I'm going to try and watch past that and see whether I can get over my not Claire Grogan aversion.
Okay, so Ollie, what is your favourite moment ever in all of Red Dwarf?
Ooh.
It's almost like it's an exam with like questions that get more and more difficult.
Yeah. I don't know that I've got one. There's so many great lines that I can remember. But if I pick any one of them, you're just going to remind me of a different one, which I'm also going to find equally awesome. I quite liked the... what was the one where they all woke up having thought they'd been playing a video game?
Back to reality.
Back to reality. That had a lot of very good lines. The whole thing with the little kid that guy's trying to kill because she stole an apple of the people. I thought that was hilarious.
That's traffic control.
Yes. Cheek bullets, cybernetics. Yeah, I don't know that I have one really.
How about you then, Martyn?
I'm going to go back to an earlier call that I made because, like I said, a lot of my memories of more feelings rather than kind of encyclopedic knowledge. It's going to have to be that first time that Crichton tried to say Smeghead, and then subsequently every time after that. It sums up the ridiculousness of Red Dwarf in one line, and for me, it's perfect. Red Dwarf that he's desperately wanting to say to these people, these idiots, what he thinks of them. And he really struggling through it to get there. And I mean, there's times like that in real life when I feel like that. I sympathise with him in those moments. Yeah, it plays into the fact that he's my favourite character, and those bits especially. So I suppose it's as bad an answer or as good an answer as Ollie's, because really it's every moment he says that. So it's not one particular moment.
And finally, would you like some toast?
No toast.
A muffin?
No muffin.
What about a crumpet?
Only if it's got Vindaloo on it.
So that would normally be the end of the office exam. I would like to say that you've both passed, but there are 3 more questions for this episode because we're talking about the RPG. So, Martyn, how did you get into RPGs?
Okay, I was actually discussing this with Ollie not that long ago. The first time I actually played an RPG was probably mid-90s. One of my friends, I used to go over and play like tabletop games with them. And he said, "Oh, I got this thing. It's like a box with like kind of fantasy characters in. We can give it a go." And I think I spoke to Ollie about this, and he said it was one of the original D&D boxes, and it was basically it was an original D&D box, and you started off in a dungeon. You had to escape from it. Neither of us had played before. He took on the role of GM. I took on the role of a player, and within about 10 minutes, my character had died because I'd come across this guy in another cell who I'd let out, and he turned out to be a werewolf and killed me. and it was like, oh, okay, so that's what role-playing games are. But what I was also saying when we were having this discussion was that kind of before that, I'd played things like Hero Quest and Advanced Hero Quest, and what we'd done is we'd always come up with kind of side stories for the characters, and we'd play through kind of campaigns that weren't in the books. Like, we'd write our own stories. So we were kind of doing, me and my friend that used to play Hero Quest, Advanced Hero Quest, we were kind of doing role-playing with just the board game rules, and then kind of making up these characters as we went along.
Yeah, you were always going to be playing RPGs if you were doing that with Hero Quest.
Yeah, and I mean, then I went to university, and I joined the role-playing club there and played one game of D&D, didn't really like it. And then from there, it was really like Ollie was then my gateway drug, because I started playing Vampire the Masquerade with Ollie at uni in about 98, I think it was.
And just like drugs, you can't quit me.
No, I can't.
If it helps, Ollie was also my gateway drug to RPGs as well. I got this tiny little background of having a box of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and playing on my own, which is about as pathetic as it could be. I think.
It's surprising how many people did that, though.
Yeah. And I did a lot of play-by-post stuff between that and then meeting Ollie, where he invited me to have a game of Dungeons and Dragons. But I did a huge amount of, like, when you think about it, play-by-post is so dead. No one will do that now. But I was so into that. And I loved it.
Everyone likes getting a letter, don't they?
Exactly. But yeah, then I met Ollie, and he was like, "Do you want to have a game of Dungeons and Dragons?" And I was like, I kind of, completely jumped at it, because it's something I'd wanted to do since I'd had that box that I played on my own. Yeah. Ollie, you were clearly the RPG kind of godfather. How did you get into it?
I played D&D. I got the red box, like a lot of kids our age, I think.
I think all three of us had that fucking box.
Yeah, it was a D&D starter set, and I remember that dungeon where you start off in a kind of prison cell. I don't remember much else about that except that there was a poster with it, a really cool poster of a red dragon. I had it on my wall, and it got so bleached by the sunlight, and part of it was hidden behind a dresser. And when I took that poster down, like, the dragon had turned white, except for this strip along the bottom that was kind of a deep red. Anyway, I played D&D a little bit in secondary school, and then after that I kind of fell in with a bunch of nerdy goths at college who were playing Vampire the Masquerade, which just completely blew me away. So I played that, and I did Vampire LARP, and then off I went to university and kind of found a bunch of other role players and have been doing it ever since, really.
So, Ollie, what systems have you played a lot of?
Oh, God.
7 hours later.
Yeah. So, like, the World of Darkness systems, you got Vampire and Mage are probably the two I played most of that. D&D 3.x, D&D 5th edition, Ars Magica, which is my great love in role-playing games. Of the 40k systems, Rogue Trader and Dark Heresy. Did a fair bit of Cyberpunk back in the day. I've been running for Martyn and another guy we know a game of Coriolis, which is pretty cool and has lovely artwork. And yeah, a variety of others, but those are the ones I've played most.
How about you, Martyn?
Well, I played quite a lot of the White Wolf games with Ollie at uni. So Vampire the Masquerade. He ran a mage game, played in that. and then we kind of attention shifted to the 3rd edition of D&D, which came out while we were at uni.
Yeah.
And we played a lot of 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons. And then from there, we played, I think, had a bit of a break, really, and then moved to Manchester. And then I ran that 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons game for you, Mark, and Ollie.
I remember. Yeah.
Remember it well.
And then from there, I've just kind of been accumulating games and playing them when I can, which with 3 kids isn't as often as, I would probably like, but I love spending time with my kids. Just get that out there. But I've been playing a lot of Cypher System games online with, I've signed up to kind of online cons, playing with some Americans. So I've been playing some Numenera, and I played the Vert RPG, which is based on the books by Jeff Noon, but it's in the Cypher System, which is Monty Cook Games' kind of system of choice. Those, and then I've really got into a lot of the Swedish RPGs from Fria Ligan, which is the Free League Publishing. So that's games like Tales from the Loop, which there was a TV show made of recently. Don't know if you saw it.
Right.
Forbidden Lands, which I ran a game for Ollie and Geth, another friend of ours, which is kind of D&D-esque, but with a kind of focus on survival.
And exploration as well. There's quite a lot
survival and exploration. You get a map with it made up of hexes, and you kind of have to search them out, and you have adventure sites that you can kind of put in different hexes on the map. So everyone's version of the map will be different. It's like a legacy board game in that way.
Right.
Where you'll kind of plot your own adventure, and everyone's will be different. And then recently they've come out with other games as well.
Such as Coriolis.
Yes, such as Coriolis, which is, sci-fi. Arabian Nights in Space is the strapline for that.
That sounds magnificent.
It is very good. And
if you're never going to play it, the rulebook is still very, very pretty.
It is. And you can see the blueprint in that for the game that they came out with last year, which is the Alien RPG, which is based on the Alien franchise. Got one of the main writers from Fox, who actually helped create it, and that is well worth a purchase, even if you're never going to play it, because the artwork, the source material, it's beautiful. It's a well put together book. So yeah, I've just been picking up a lot of Swedish RPGs. Most of them are in English, some of them aren't, so that's helping me with my Swedish. Yeah.
For me, it started with Dungeons and Dragons, and then I moved on to some of the more famous ones like Rogue Trader and Ars Magica and a few others.
More famous than D&D?
No, but I mean more famous within the... I've never heard of the Swedish ones, is what I mean. Whereas, they're not more famous than D&D. D&D is God when it comes to RPGs, isn't it? But I didn't get on with version 5 of Dungeons and Dragons when I tried. Maybe I'd got more used to systems like Mage and Ars and stuff like that. I don't know. I've played quite a lot of Buffy the Vampire Slayer as well, which is quite similar in style to this, actually.
Yeah, Buffy's one of those games that I've always been kind of interested in, but I ended up picking up a game called Monster of the Week, which perfectly kind of encapsulates that Buffy feel.
Yeah, that would make sense, because that's exactly what it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I now don't feel like I ever really need to pick it up, because it's even got, it has playbooks, different types of characters, and one of them is the chosen one. Yeah. So,
I mean, more recently, I've not been playing the more complex or the usual style of RPGs. I've picked up quite a few one-page RPGs, and I've been running those online with my Explorer Scout group, and they've been really, really fun. And it's proved to me in a lot of ways you don't need a gigantic tome as long as you've got imaginative players and some very simple rules that are fun. You don't need these gigantic tomes, and that's changed my outlook on RPG completely, I think. Ones that I've played include Honey Heist, where you are a group of bears dressed in human clothing, trying to rob honey from the honey convention without the people working out that you're bears. They're that silly is the kind of stuff I've been playing recently.
Well, I think that's the one I suggested as well, wasn't it? When you were kind of asking for.
Yes, it was you that I came to.
Yeah, Grant Howitt, who wrote that, his one-page RPGs are fantastic.
And the final question before we actually get to what we're supposed to be doing: what's your favourite system, Martyn?
Oh gosh, system or game? Because I think those are two different questions.
Really?
Yeah, because system can be...
I suppose you could say D20, couldn't you? And then that would cover lots. Okay, yeah, what's your favourite game?
Okay, my favourite game... I'm very much a new, shiny kind of person when it comes to RPGs.
So much.
Ollie knows this very well. So I would say that it's probably... I can only narrow it down to two. You can't get me on one. So it's going to be my two most recent games that I've got. One is called Versen, which is by Free League Publishing, and it is originally based on an artwork book by Johan Egerkrans about spirits and monsters of Scandinavian folklore. And it was he did the illustrated book, and then Free League approached him and said, "Would you like to collaborate with us and do a role-playing game about it?" And
I've seen that. Yeah, you showed me that. Oh, it's fantastic.
That's cool.
Yeah, and he was like, yes, because the whole reason I did this book in the first place was to do a Swedish version of the old monster manuals that I used to have for role-playing games when I was little.
Amazing.
So it's kind of come full circle for him, and the game is kind of based on its strapline is Nordic horror role-playing.
Nice.
So it's set in the late 1800s, and you are a band of investigators, and you're investigating the Versen, which are these creatures, these mythical creatures. And it's in that time of change in the world, the Industrial Revolution. So what's happening is humans are kind of expanding, cities are becoming full of smog, and it's starting to grow out of the cities, and it's kind of encroaching on these mythic beings, and it's throwing them out of balance in the world. So before, where people would know to, you would leave out some milk to kind of appease them overnight, these creatures, people are stopping doing that, and it's making them turn a little bit feral, turn against the humans. And you're basically investigators trying to solve these problems. Not necessarily, it's not like D&D, you're not there to kill them. Often these things are very powerful. You can't match them, hope to match them. You're trying to find a way to redress the balance that has been broken by humanity expanding beyond its means, really.
Brilliant. That does sound good.
The other game is Mörkeborg, which means Dark Fort, and that is a doom metal album of a game. Spiked flail to the face. Rules light, heavy, everything else. And it's basically a pre-apocalypse role-playing game that is very much in the essence of old school Dungeons and Dragons. It's part of the OSR, so old school revival / Renaissance. People taking the old versions of D&D and kind of running with that feeling of you're not really superheroes like you are more in the new versions of D&D, like powerful. It's more like everything is against you. And the whole point of the game is the world is going to end. You cannot stop it. What are you going to eke out for yourself before it ends?
Right.
So yeah, those are my two picks.
And how about you, Ollie?
Well, I have thoughts on this. Favourite system and favourite setting are definitely two different things. But I very much have a preference that systems should match setting, and that certain systems work well for certain kinds of games and not for other kinds of games. But if we're going with my favourite game, I am very much a builder. in role-playing games. So Ars Magica is my all-time favourite game. I just love the very long-term development and the way your characters and their home, the Covenant, kind of grow and develop over decades or potentially centuries, and the strong exploration kind of vibe of it as well. You know, there's a lot out there in the world that you've got to kind of go out and find, but it's very heavily player directed as well. So yeah, really, really love that.
I think it's probably my favourite as well. I just enjoyed the element of having things to do involved in the game when you're not with your friends playing the game. I really liked that element of it.
Oh yeah.
I know some people have said that they don't want homework, they want to just turn up and play. So it is quite a polarising system, I think, but I really enjoyed thinking about the game in between sessions. So yeah, it's probably my favourite as well.
Yeah, I think I would count myself in one of those minimal homework, please, especially since we've had the girls. My time is limited.
Yeah, ours is just completely polarising, I think.
And I think nowadays there are so many role-playing games out there. It is fine. There's a game for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. So, gentlemen, we have all read the main source book for the Red Dwarf RPG game. Now, there were 3 books, but only this source book is even vaguely possible to get, in my opinion. I know you did manage to source the other 2, Martyn, but did you pay astronomical amounts for it?
No. It wasn't that much.
What are the other 2?
What are they? Right, well, so the initial run, I did a little bit of homework for this. The initial run of the Red Dwarf role-playing game was supposed to be 3 separate products. They were initially supposed to release in 2002 due to some personal problems of the people that actually wrote the book. They ended up releasing it in 2003. They first came out with the role-playing game itself, and they followed it up shortly afterwards with the AI screen, which the AI is the word for the dungeon master in this game. And with that, you got the screen, which is fairly standard cardboard, 3 foldable pages, folds out. On the outside, it's got in the middle panel, it's got a big holly face to represent the fact that you're the AI.
Right.
On the other one, it's got weapon info and character type stat caps. So that's like you face it outwards so that the players can see the weapon information on the screen if you've got it in front of them.
Right.
And then on the inside, it's got a character creation overview, rules overview, fear factor table. It's basically got all of the kind of rules that you'll run across in the game as you're running it. Yeah. So a fairly standard GM screen. You know, if you've played something like Dungeons and Dragons or any other game that has one of those, it's not made to incredibly high quality. It bends easily. It's not that thick cardboard that you get with D&D. It's more like the outside of a large softback book, so you have to be careful with it.
Oh, shit, it sounds like a lot of those that, even if there weren't many printed, there's even fewer of them now because they'll have disintegrated by the sounds of things.
Well, mine came in plastic wrap. It had never been opened, and it was the original plastic wrap as well. So I think I lucked out there. Within that, there was something called Red Dwarf AI Screen Extra Bits Book. It's a little bit disappointing when you first see it. It's black and white print, and it's kind of staple bound. It looks like it would rip easily.
Bloody hell.
And it feels like it's almost an afterthought. The interesting bits of what's inside it, it has 2 new character types, and it also has some additional NPCs. It's got a little section on War World. It's got a very important item generator. You roll randomly on it, and you can generate red dwarfy items for your characters to carry around. It's got a little bit of new hardware, new vehicles, It's got a creature design toolkit in there, so you can kind of make your own creatures to populate the Red Dwarf universe with. Adventure seeds. It's got another character sheet and vehicle registration sheet on the back, which are kind of exactly the same as in the main book, but maybe it's because it's probably easier to photocopy this. Although, to be honest, I think if I bent it, I would rip the paper because it's, like I say, it's not well put together. The interesting thing from the character type point of view is that the two new types of races, which are the Series 3000 mechanoid, which are the ones that look human,
Right.
that were discontinued because humans found them too creepy, and the Vindiluvian Gelf, which you'll remember from the episode when Dave and Kat pretend to be them. They've actually created a race out of them for one of the many different universes within the Red Dwarf multiverse.
Is that the one from Gunman of the Apocalypse where they put Crichton's eyes on their chins?
That is indeed the one.
Fantastic.
Yes. So yeah, they're quite funny, but a little bit silly because they just want to eradicate all humanity. So if you have a human in the group, they're not going to get along very well. Yes. So that's that. That's the AI screen, and then the other one. This is the good one. The main game is called the role-playing game, and this one is called the role-playing game series Sourcebook, and this is a deep dive into series 1 to 8, every single episode. And what they've done is they've gone episode to episode and they've created NPC stat blocks for all the important characters. They've given you a summary of each episode, and then little bits here and there when they use certain pieces of equipment, they'll stat the equipment out. And this is a very well put together book. It's not hardback; it is softback again, but it's 156 pages of series 1 to 8 goodness.
Right.
And it's got everything in there that you could possibly want to know about each of those episodes. So it gives you a lot of information. If you're wanting to have your group dive into an episode, then you just look in there, you pick it out, you've got all your NPCs, you got what's happening, you can go from there really. So that's a very good book.
So that's brilliant, and I think it sounds like one of them was great and one of them was tat. And, RPGs can be like that. There are some source books that are brilliant, and there are some source books that are just cash-ins.
Yeah, I mean, I think the AI screen one, it was just a DM screen, really. It feels like they maybe just put stuff in that hadn't made the cut into the main rule book. And they're like, we'll just put a little cheap insert in as an extra. But those two are very much, you would have to look after them if you got a copy of them, because they would, if you were ever rough with them, or if anything got spilt on them at the game table, they would not survive that. They're not built for that at all. So something to bear in mind if you manage to track them down.
Shall we look at the system? It's quite a simple one. It involves 2d6, and basically everyone has their own set of 2 six-sided dice. A 12 is a critical fail, and Snake Eyes is a critical success. It's called the XPS system, and the aim is to roll low. What did you think of that, guys?
It's simple, so for one-shot games it would be useful because, it doesn't require like a thorough understanding of the system. Having not played it though, I don't know how well it actually plays. I'd imagine it's fairly fast in play, but I don't know what the kind of, success-fail rate is for rolls and skills and stuff. And if you're trying to roll under something on 2d6, average on 2d6 is 7. So if you've got a skill at, say, 2 and a main stat at 2, you're going to be trying to roll a 4 or under on 2d6. That's a really quite tricky roll. And 2 and 2 is not necessarily a bad stat in this game either. Stats are quite low.
Yeah, they did seem to be that, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Ollie. I think there's a method to the madness there, in that I think they want you to fail regularly, because if you think of an episode of Red Dwarf, up until the very end of the episode, when they tend to then succeed at what they're doing, it's just a series of failures.
There is that, yeah.
And I think they're doing that to kind of lean into, your character's failed at something again. Let's find out what happens.
And I think you've got something there, because it's supposed to be funny, and if you're successful all the time, you can't really make much humour from that.
It's hard, and I think that was quite a deliberate choice of theirs to lean into that for the comedy value. There's actually a section in there where it tells you your success chance, and yeah, it's weighted towards failure, basically. Reading through it, that's what I got. That's kind of the point. You'll have something you're good at, but most of the stuff you will not be good at.
Yeah.
Yeah. Looking at the character that I generated, which we'll be talking about later, I've got some skills at a combined score of 10, but that cost me a lot, and everything else is super, super low.
Yeah.
But I've always been a bit of a min-maxer. Ollie knows that.
It's good to be good at something.
Well, min-maxers, for people who aren't massively into RPGs, are players like me who like to be incredibly exceptional at one or two things, and it means you're shit at everything else, and I've always played that. I want to be the greatest, I don't know, surgeon in the galaxy, but that means that I can't talk to anyone because I'm cripplingly rude, or whatever. And I've always enjoyed that kind of play, and I don't feel like it should be looked down upon as much as it is within the role-playing community.
I think it gets confused with Munchkinism a lot of the time. Like, you're quite happy with your min-max characters to have a character who is really bad at stuff, whereas a lot of min-maxers, that they minimise the stuff that isn't important or that will never become a factor.
Oh no, I want to be shit at things
Yeah,
that
yeah.
are important and look clueless, and yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right, there is a difference. Munchkinism, for people who don't play RPGs, is basically people who look for loopholes and flaws in the rules to make your character much more powerful than anyone else's, with the kind of like effect being that if you're role-playing an interesting character, that becomes less important than having a powerful character. Is that about a fair description?
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah.
There's even an RPG called Munchkin where you're encouraged to do that, which I quite like.
I think talking about the system as well, obviously Deep Seven Publishing, they had their own in-house system, and that's what they based the game on. But it's interesting, at the time that this game was released, they finalised publication of the role-playing game in 2002. It got a slightly delayed release into 2003. But if you think about the role-playing games that were out at that time, D&D 3rd Ed was in its heyday. The D20 Open Gaming license, which Wizards of the Coast released, had completely overshadowed the rest of the role-playing world. Everybody was rushing to release their RPGs. Some were even converting their in-house systems to D20 rolling games.
Yeah.
White Wolf did that with some of their games. I think they did it with Adventure and with Aberrant. There was lots of publishers that wanted to get in on that, and I think this was they deliberately steered away from that because it would have been very hard to have this kind of game with the D20 system.
Brave when you think about it.
Very brave, because they'd have probably garnered a lot more sales as well if they'd have just gone D20. And I think that's probably why it's kind of had the trajectory it has in the gaming space, which is it actually impacted quite a bit when it landed. It got really good reviews. It was getting talked about at a lot of conventions in the States. And then it just kind of disappeared. And, now it's hard to get the books. They lost the license. It's gone back to, is it Grant Naylor Productions?
Yeah, and no one's had the license since. There's only these 3 books, 2 of which are almost impossible to get unless you're Martyn. And that was it.
Yeah. And it was very deliberate that they chose to do this, not only because it was their in-house system, but because they wanted to steer away from that D20 rolling game. And I think it was very brave of them, but also from a business perspective, maybe a little bit foolhardy.
The comparison I made with D&D, really, the only thing that I could see was the initiative system seemed to be very similar. But other than that, it does feel like a completely different system.
Yeah. Again, there was a deliberateness there, and it wouldn't be the game it is if they'd have gone D20. And I'm quite happy with the game in some ways that it turned out to be. I think it would have been hard to lean into the comedy element with a D20 game.
Yeah.
I also thought that the AI system, rather than a GM, the person running the game is called the AI, I thought it was nicely concise. To play the GM in Dungeons and Dragons, you need a separate book, and then you need a monster manual, and you need to know 101 rules. Whereas I felt like they kind of simplified it and made it much more concise for someone to run this game.
Yeah.
The streamed down rule set helps with that.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. If you've got a rule set that is as easy as this is, it's add one number to another number, roll underneath it. Then the AI is really just there to kind of keep the ball rolling, place things in the character's way. But I do like the AI, and I do like the way that I don't know if you want to talk about that a bit later, or are you happy to talk about it now, Mark?
No, talk about it now.
I like the way they present that. The AI is actually, as well as being the GM, you're also a character. You're playing Holly.
Yeah.
And I like that. I like that the GM has that. Because sometimes in games, the GM will say something, a little bit sarcastic about what you're doing, but it's not in game. It's out of game. But in this, you get to bring that commentary into the game.
Yeah.
Your characters are doing something ridiculous, and, Holly will pike up. Well, I really wouldn't do that if I were you.
Do you remember the episode Queeg, where Holly in Series 2, Holly convinced everyone that he'd been replaced with a much more strict computer? Something like that.
Shape of the century.
Yeah, exactly right. April, May, June, July and August fall. It would mean that you could almost have two different personalities if they ended up on two different ships. You could almost switch the way you treat your players depending on which AI you're playing, and that's really cool.
It is. It's an excellent way of handling it, and it's also one of the few games where I think you could actually have a traditional GM, and then you could have someone who didn't want to necessarily be a character, but they wanted to be involved, playing the Holly as well. And you could delegate that, so you could have a co-GM who is the Holly character. Because sometimes, people get enjoyment in different ways in role-playing games. Some people don't want to be quite as involved, but they still want to be part of it. You could have someone who maybe just wants to occasionally interject being the Holly, and the other person being the, describe the scene.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that's a good point. That could be fun.
Yeah, could definitely work.
Especially if you've got someone who's got a nice little bit of snark to them. And, you could go, look, I know you're not really wanting to do the character thing, but, if you could just interject every now and again with the ridiculousness of what the characters are doing, that would be great.
Yeah, someone who's sarcastic or a bit of a cloud cuckoo lander.
Yeah, exactly. And it provides that halfway house. You're not the GM, you're not a player, but if you want to fit in that little niche, it could be a good inroad for people that maybe aren't so sure about the whole role-playing game, but they want to be involved. Yeah, I like it.
So looking at the rule system, I found myself comparing bits and bobs to other games that I'm familiar with and enjoy. I thought, for example, the Destiny points was quite almost exactly the same as the fate points you might have in Dark Heresy. And so, some of the specializations when it comes to your skills was quite similar to something you might do in Ars Magica. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that they've taken good stuff from good systems. And now I've said that, I'm wondering if this was actually before Dark Heresy.
2002? Yeah, would have been.
Yeah, well before Dark Heresy.
Ooh, so Dark Heresy stole from Red Dwarf the RPG game. You heard it first on Shipwrecked and Comatose on the We Made This Podcast Network.
I think this game has a lot of stuff in there that's really interesting if you think when it was being written. it's got some problems with it, but it's also got some really kind of looking towards games that were much closer towards where we are now. In terms of things like the destiny points and the simplicity of the system to drive a certain type of narrative. That's much more modern game design, like modern indie game design.
Yeah, it feels like the rule set for a one-shot. Like this, it's not sufficiently deep enough to really give you much in the way of interesting options to explore. But it'd be perfect for a one-shot, you got half an hour to come up with a character, and then we'll play for 3 hours. And maybe that'll run once, or maybe we'll run a couple of times. But it's not got the kind of depth that the kind of bigger role-playing systems have.
Yeah.
With the kind of the varying ways that you can customize characters and kind of progress and develop and stuff.
I thought the improvement system was quite robust, actually. Stuff like making new skills much more expensive than skills you already had. And I thought that was quite nice. And I certainly didn't think this game it would be appropriate to go ding, level 2, ding, level 3, ding, level 4. So what would you have had them do for character improvement other than what they've done?
Nothing. I think they've got it exactly right for the setting. I don't think Red Dwarf itself lends itself to the more kind of epic type campaigns that you would have in something like D&D or Dark Heresy, to take the two examples we've been using. I think it's much more set up for short campaigns and one shots.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Red Dwarf itself, each series is 6 episodes.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think what you're really looking at if you're going to run a Red Dwarf campaign, what you're really going to do is this is series 1, this is episode 1, and you're going to go we're going to play 6 sessions. Each one is going to have its own storyline, and maybe something will happen at the end that might run into a series 2. But otherwise, the rule set is you can build your characters. It's not. I think I kind of agree. I agree with what Ollie's saying, that it's not set up for that kind of epic campaign play, but it is set up for your characters to improve in certain ways. And I think those two things, you can have one without the other. This game is set up to be Red Dwarf, the role-playing game, and it's not a game that you would take and apply to another setting.
Yeah, absolutely.
The thing you mentioned about it being episodic was very, very heavily emphasised in the Buffy the role-playing game Sourcebook that was released around a similar time to this, whereas I feel this is a little bit more implicit, but you're bang on that you should be having an episode where something funny happens, conclusion, maybe one or two role-playing sessions. Then another episode, something funny happens, conclusion, maybe 1 or 2 role-playing sessions. But the difference between this and the Buffy game was the Buffy game heavily emphasised that that's what a GM should be doing with their system.
Yeah. Especially with Red Dwarf, even more so, because you look at the way Red Dwarf is structured, and there's little kind of plot that extends beyond 1 or 2 episodes. Generally it's kind of like you got the big setup, which is where the characters are and the characters themselves, and then every episode really is a different story. There's a couple of 2-parters I seem to recall.
Yeah.
And I know season 8 went into the whole, they're now in the prison, and that's kind of like an ongoing thing. But it's not really set up for a kind of a grand story. I mean, Red Dwarf's not really about story at all.
No.
It's about the jokes and the characters.
I mean, there were 2 cliffhangers that they never resolved, remember?
Oh, go on.
Well, the end of Series 2.
Yeah.
They kind of covered that with a tiny little... a couple of paragraphs at the start of the Series 3. And then at the end of Series 6, they came to their future selves, better dead than Smeg. And that wasn't really resolved either. And I think that's kind of something you could incorporate into your game is if you fucked over your characters to the point where they can't get out of something, you end the season and you start another one.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I think this game, there's a section in the rule book where it talks about character death, and it says this might happen, but really this is Red Dwarf, so you could just come back as a hologram.
Yeah.
alternative universe, or
yeah, it doesn't have to be the end of that character. You know, if you're settled on playing a character, it's like you can keep. What they basically said is you can keep that character. Continuity does not matter in this game.
Yeah.
Ooh, let's not go into the continuity of Red Dwarf.
Well, no, exactly, and that's exactly why this game as written is actually a very good representation of Red Dwarf, I think, because they say it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, which is true. But when you look at the series, you don't turn to the next episode of Red Dwarf to find out what happened, the continuing plot, how they resolved the thing that they got left on the last episode. You turn in because it's funny, and it'll be a new funny episode, a new funny story.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about regarding the system before we move on to the quality of the source book itself?
Just that it's really hard to judge a system by rules as written. I really think you need to play it to really see how it actually kind of turns out. And once you've played it, then everyone always house rules their own stuff a little bit. But then it'll be kind of like, well, if it turns out that success is actually difficult on a roll, then are you basically just kind of hand-waving no rolling where it's not very dramatic? A lot of systems do that, where they make success hard on a dice roll, but they basically say, well, if you've got a skill for this task, and it's not a dramatic thing if you pass or fail, well then, you know how to do it. It's fine, don't roll. Don't even roll. You only roll when there's some kind of dramatic thing going on.
Although I would say that in a comedy game, sometimes you may make characters roll when in another game you wouldn't, because the failure may ensue in hilarity.
Yes, that's true.
But one thing I would say for any listeners that are into RPGs and are maybe into more modern role-playing games, there is definitely a content warning on this game. It is very much a game that was written in 2002, and no sensitivity reader has ever looked at this game.
Yeah, that's something for discussing the source book itself, I think.
Okay.
Let's move on to that. The book is written with some clear humour, and some of it is actually funny and satirical. It has photos from the show and some original art, and it also has quite a lot of show quotes in boxes and some Space Corps directives. But yes, do you want to talk about some of the humour that's in the book?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, it's full of quotes from the show. Some of those quotes are fine. Some of them with a more modern outlook are not fine. And I would say my major peeve is when you look at the character creation. Part of that character creation is personality. And you have things called assets, liabilities, and behaviour tags. Now, the liabilities section of that is just a whole big load of wow. It's very ableist. And yeah, like I say, this is the section where I was like, a sensitivity reader, which you get in modern RPGs, has never read through this and commented on it. Because its reference to mental health is pretty awful.
It's questionable, definitely.
Yes, and I know what they're going for, because some of early Red Dwarf is a bit like that. But if this was to ever get a modern conversion, that is something that they would definitely have to look at, because some of this stuff is not fit for a modern RPG, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that is the problem with looking at stuff that's sourced in the 80s and 90s. I've actually got a term for it when we're discussing the episodes of Red Dwarf. I call it 80s ick. And it's stuff that was fine at the time, but now makes me wince.
Yeah.
And Red Dwarf isn't as bad as some stuff for its 80s ick.
Yeah. But it's got some in there.
Oh, it definitely has some in there. Films of the time are worse, actually. Yeah. But there is a little bit of 80s ick, and you've got to look at it like that and acknowledge that it's problematic now, but it wasn't then.
Yeah, exactly. And I think role-playing games have come a long way since then in terms of having things like sensitivity readers. People, Monty Cook Games have just come out with a game called We Are All Mad Here, which is based on fairy tales. Alice in Wonderland, things like that. They employed sensitivity readers, and it's a very tasteful way of looking at mental health issues and how to run a game looking at that in a much more kind of tasteful way, and not in the very ableist way that it is looked at in this book. And that was one thing for me. I was just sat with my wife, and I just kept like turning the book to her and going, "Oh my gosh, look at this!" And she was like, "Wow." Anything you think, Ollie?
I mean, I kind of expected that because Red Dwarf is such a long-running show. So I guess kind of I was spotting them as I was going through and just thinking, well, that's kind of par for the course. But you're right, it does feel very different from a more kind of modern game. I mean, what else about the book? The humour is one thing that always gets me. That it's hard to do humour. Humour is not necessarily an easy thing when you're trying to do it.
Yeah, and it's hit and miss.
Yeah, and most role-playing games that I played are funny anyway. You got your mates around. You're doing this because it's fun, and even games that are kind of quite dramatic, you're often having quite a laugh doing it. But trying to capture that Red Dwarf kind of comedy, slightly surrealist, slightly ridiculous kind of style of comedy, I thought they're basically doing it by extrapolating from the show in the book. So, like you said, but they got a load of quotes from the show and Space Corps directives mixed in. But actually translating that into a game, I think could be tricky. Especially because when you're going from something where the comedy is something you're being fed, like, there's no interaction with the TV show. You watch the show, they deliver the joke, and it's been, a writer's come up with the joke, the crew have probably rehearsed the joke, they've tried different ways to make it work, and then you get the joke.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, trying to get that joke naturally in the course of play, I don't know how easy it would be to kind of get the feel.
One thing I think about that is there's, in the series Sourcebook, there's a foreword by Hattie Hayridge. And she actually kind of, in that foreword, there's a bit in that which I think is quite apt for trying to draw out comedy. And she says, the writers drew on aspects of our personalities to feed into the characters. Vanity and interest in engines, being a slob, grumpiness, and apologetic nature. I'll let you guess which is which. The casting characters became a kind of hybrid, and certain traits of these oddballs rebounded onto us and fused. And I think that's interesting because I think in a game like this, what you need to really do is your players are creating characters, but what you need to do is you need to take into account who your players are, and I think the comedy will come from them. You give them a ridiculous situation, and I mean, we've all done it. We've played a role-playing game, and there's certain moments where someone says something and everyone just falls about laughing. I think it's a part of role-playing games, and I don't think you have to actually force it. I think if you give a ridiculous situation, your players will lead you to the comedy.
Yeah, I think there's an element of the fact that it's almost not going to be funny because you're trying to force it, whereas the organic situation you're talking about could be in any single RPG system. From, you could have a very funny Buffy the Vampire Slayer game, or you could have a very serious Buffy the Vampire Slayer game, depending on who you're playing with.
Yeah, and how the GM is kind of running it.
Do you think you would be a good GM for this game?
I would suck at GM in this game.
I disagree with you there, Ollie, because I think you are a perfect Holly.
Which one?
Any that can ably give sarcastic comments on what the characters are doing. I mean, you kind of do that anyway, just out of character. All you need to do is just do what you do. I really think that it depends on the players, and it does depend on the GM. But I think if you go into it looking for humour, you've already failed.
Yeah. I think 12 months ago I'd have been terrible at this, but having run one-shots, single pages that are designed to be daft and funny, I actually think that this was almost a precursor to that. It's somewhere in between the complexity of Dungeons & Dragons and the simplicity of the one-pages that I've been playing. So I think I'd do all right at this now. But if you'd have asked me this 12 months ago, I'd have gone, I'm just not funny enough.
I honestly think that all you have to do with this is present exactly the same kind of problems you would in a normal role-playing game, and the system will lead you to the comedy, because, as Ollie mentioned, it's a system that skews towards failure. So plan a heist episode, but everything is going wrong.
Yeah.
You don't need to have funny one-liners planned as a GM, because your players are going to take care of that with their outbursts when everything keeps going wrong. I really think that this game, on the surface, looks like it would be hard to run, but actually, as long as you came with an idea of what the premise of the episode is, not what's going to happen, because the characters and the players decide that for you, but the premise of what's going to push them off, and then just see where it goes.
Yeah.
Hilarity will ensue.
Yeah, looking at the source book itself, there was some stuff that it did very, very well. The quick start guide at the start I thought was genius. I thought that was a really good thing to do.
You could print that out and give that to your players as a reference sheet to just really help them.
Yeah, photocopy it. And I also thought that the majority of it made sense, and as long as you got a little bit of experience in RPGs, you could pretty much hit the ground running with this system.
Yeah. Very much so. I think it's made to just very quickly generate a character and get into silly shenanigans in space.
Yeah, which would make it great for a one-shot, when you've got some people, but you've got no real kind of time to prepare. This would be great, because someone could knock out, you could do everyone's characters in like half an hour, and then be straight into playing. And you wouldn't need the kind of heavy-duty prep and world-building that you might do in a more serious game.
And they also thought that it was pretty comprehensive when it came to the list of equipment from the show and the ships and stuff like that. And I really liked the worst case scenario in the worlds to give you some threads to play with. Was there anything else that you two really liked in the source book?
Nothing leaps to mind.
Martyn?
I really liked that at the end, in Appendix A, they had a designer's notes section. I think that was very forward-thinking for the time.
Yeah, that's a nice touch.
They go through the creation of it and about the XPG system and what kind of system that is, and that they basically say that role-playing games tend to be one of three: either a reality model system, a narrative game, or a cinematic game, which kind of blends the two. And they've said that they've put this one firmly in the third camp.
Yeah.
Where they've blended a little bit of reality with a little bit of narrativism, and they've come out with this. And I would agree with that. You've got a relatively robust system for what it is, what it's trying to do, but it's also got a lot of range to just narrate what's happening without the rules getting in the way of that, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that was a nice touch that they kind of topped it off with, this is why we did it this way.
Yeah.
I always find it interesting when you get the designer's input on stuff. It's one of the great things about the internet age that we live in, is that most of the designers are online and like to talk about their work. So, I mean, I'm a big fan of the game Mage the Ascension, and I follow a guy called Phil Bricato, who's extremely heavily involved in Mage Second Ed, and getting his thoughts on stuff and why stuff is done a certain way. It really helps you with your own games, and it also helps you kind of put things into context. So some of the cringier things that are in these games that came from the 90s, you think, oh god, that's a bit, it's a bit stereotypical about certain races and other cultures and stuff. And then when you hear the designer saying, I know this, but I was a 20-year-old guy, and it was pre-internet, and I was living in Seattle. We got books out from the library, but that's literally all we could get on this other culture that really wasn't a big part of the game. And you think, oh, actually, we're living in an information-blessed society. So I love it when you get to see what the designers were thinking and kind of see the decisions they made.
I think it's before its time with that particular section. And the other thing I thought was before its time as well was there was a section on how to be a good player, which I really, really liked.
Yeah, sorry, I should have said I liked that as well.
It was basically don't be a dick with some ideas of what you could be doing that would be to the detriment of the other players, including the AI or GM. And I just thought it was a great little section.
You still don't get much of that, you know. You go online, you will find huge amounts of advice on how to be a good GM, but there's really not the same kind of bulk of stuff about how to be a good player.
You know, you get that in a lot of indie RPGs, though, in Dungeon World, and in a lot of the Apocalypse World spin-offs.
Yeah.
You actually get two sections. You get the section on what you should be doing as a player, and the section what you should be doing as a GM.
But this was 17 years ago.
Yes. Oh, yeah, definitely. It was quite ahead of its time in that regard. But I think now mainstream games still don't really do that, but a lot of indie RPGs do.
Yeah.
I think that's the difference. I mean, this was an indie RPG, so I don't know many indie RPGs from that time, but maybe that was actually quite common at the time to be putting that stuff in.
Maybe.
I don't know. Because all I really played back then was quite mainstream RPGs like D&D and the World of Darkness ones, which were like the two big hitters back then, really.
Same.
So, I don't particularly want to be super negative, but I think it's fair to have a look at what we think wasn't particularly strong in the source book. I got particularly annoyed with Chapter 7. I thought it was excessive. That was the one where it gave you an example of how a game would play. And I thought that maybe needed a couple of pages rather than a massive chapter where they over-egged it.
I guess that's one of those things, isn't it? Is that for an experienced role player, you know, most role-playing games have something like that. You know, they have examples of play. And I got to say, when I read rulebooks now, I skip those sections.
Yeah, I skipped this one as well. This is the only thing I didn't read. I read it from cover to cover, but skipped Chapter 7.
I mean, to be fair, it's only 4 pages long.
I thought it was about 6 or 8.
No. It's only actually 4 pages long. I mean, I quite like that, but I would have put it earlier in the book.
Right.
I would have put it at an earlier part of the book, because at the beginning it introduces it and say, what do you do in a role-playing game? Because I think a lot of people that would have bought this were probably Red Dwarf fans who might not have played a role-playing game before.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think what you should have done is you should have had that as chapter 2.
I always think it's one of the weaknesses of role-playing games is that any main rulebook for a role-playing game essentially has to introduce what a role-playing game is, and it's always the kind of stuff that if you've been role-playing for a while, you just immediately skip it, and you think, you know, I understand it's got to be in there for new players who maybe just picked up this book or been given it as a gift, but it's essentially like wasted pages if you've played role-playing games before.
Yeah, maybe I am being a bit of a gatekeeper, which is something I don't want to do.
I think we're being a bit snobby about our hobby here. Some people, especially with something like Red Dwarf, you know, I think they were really going for Red Dwarf fans with this, and some of them might never have touched a role-playing game in 2003.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying it's not necessary. I'm just saying that, you know, once you've played role-playing games for a while, it's just the section that you skip.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe I was coming at it rather as a RPG fan than a Red Dwarf fan. Was there anything that you thought was particularly flawed within the source book itself then?
I think just the weakness of it is more kind of taste-wise. Like, I enjoy Red Dwarf as a TV show. I don't think I would enjoy it as a role-playing setting. I mean, I don't think I'm into comedy systems in general. But that's more of a taste thing rather than an objective thing. Same reason, you know, I've got no real interest in playing Pugmire, or to be honest, you know, stuff like Buffy.
Pugmire looks great. How dare you?
Oh, it looks terrible.
I agree, Mark.
Good. For those of you that don't know, Pugmire is basically, it's a fantasy RPG, but everyone's a fucking dog. Good.
So it's like bad D&D, but with a gimmick.
Shut up, Ollie. One last thing I wanted to mention about the Red Dwarf Sourcebook. We're not talking about Pugmire. I did feel like if you were a big fan of the show, literally nothing in this book would surprise you. There was nothing new, and there wasn't really anything given to you to help you expand the Red Dwarf world if you wanted to. Do you think that's probably fair?
I think that's true, but I think that's okay. I don't think that's really the job of a main rulebook. I wouldn't
Yeah.
expect to find that in the main rulebook. I would maybe want that in supplements. But for the main book, I think, the main book's got a job to do, which is all your character gen stuff, how to play, all your rule stuff, setting stuff. I don't think you need to be terribly expansive. That really is the job of supplements.
And I think you've also got to look at the fact that it's a licensed product. And Grant Naylor probably had creative control over them not being able to expand out of the show.
True. I mean, I am playing a little bit devil's advocate here. I thought it was a great source book, actually. I was just trying to find flaws to give it some balance, and neither of you come up with anything.
The major flaw is that it's very much a product of its time, and modern role players will look askance at it. They'll look at it and they'll say, this is awful about people with mental health issues. And they'll look at the very first page in the book where it says a note on style, not the bit about it using American spellings, but the bit underneath that where it says the use of he as the customary generic pronoun is simply an editorial nod to established convention and is not intended to overlook or neglect female players, whom we all think are pretty nifty generally speaking. How condescending. I felt like that whole section was, you know what? White Wolf were using she and he pronouns before this book was written.
Years before that, yeah.
To say that it's an editorial nod to established convention is just showing how many men were involved in the writing of this book.
Yeah, there's a Kachansky box out at one point as well, which has got another similar thing about female players, where you're just reading it and you're just thinking, really?
Yeah, I think it's very condescending in that regard, and it was a product of its time, and that means that nowadays people would pick that up and they would look at it and go, I don't want to play this game. You know, if I was picking that up as a woman, I would say, I'm not going to touch that game.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of, like you said about Red Dwarf being a bit of a sausage fest up until they reintroduced Kachansky. And you think it is a little bit of a product of the setting, in that the setting that we've seen through the TV show is a total sausage fest.
Yeah.
But as far as role-playing games go, the World of Darkness were doing, from kind of before I went to university, they were doing she as the kind of the chosen pronoun in their role-playing games, and had all kinds of like badass female characters. And explicitly kind of like gender really wasn't a big deal, in particularly in Vampire, their kind of flagship game. And you think, that got a lot of women into role-playing, Vampire the Masquerade, particularly because it really didn't give a shit about gender, really, in the game at all. And now you see D&D is moving much more towards that style. You look at the new D&D books, and there are absolutely tons of badass female characters, in the arts and stuff like that, which is, very different from how it used to be. So yeah, it does kind of stand out on this one a bit. I don't know whether that's a limitation. It's hard to say it's a limitation of the time when, White Wolf had already broken that mould 5 years previous.
Yeah, 2003 doesn't feel like it's early enough for 80s ick to be something that you can kind of nod to. You'd think by 2003 maybe there was surely some proofreaders somewhere.
But then a lot of companies hadn't caught up in 2003. I mean, that's still like 17 years ago. Oh my god, I feel old.
There's a big movement in role playing at the minute about Dungeons and Dragons old source books. A lot of people are looking at things like the old Oriental Adventures, and they're specifically saying that they are culturally insensitive. There were no sensitivity readers at that time used. So much so that Wizards of the Coast have now had to put disclaimers on those because they're still selling them, saying we appreciate that this was not very good when we released it. So I think there's a movement in gaming, but it's much more recently. And in 2003, that likely wouldn't have happened. But in 2003, they would have known that some of the things that they're putting in the book weren't really okay by 2003 standards even. There's some creepy quotes in there. Page 39, Space Corps Directives, Article 196156. Any officer caught sniffing the saddle of the exercise bicycle in the women's gym will be discharged without trial. Ha ha,
Yeah.
ick.
Yeah.
So it's bits like that where, you didn't need to put that little box with that quote in.
No. It could have been any other quote that was funnier as well.
Exactly. So mainly it's that with the game for me. I like it for what it is, but what it is something that in modern role-playing terms, I would like someone like Grant Howitt to take a bash at it, someone who's written games that bring out that funniness, that hilarity in just the situation, and just write a very kind of simple role-playing game where you can play in the Red Dwarf universe. Something like that would be something I'd like to see now. And hey, the license is out there.
Yeah.
Someone just needs to go for it.
Yeah, why the hell not? Let's move on and talk about the character generation very briefly before we reveal the characters that we have created. I thought that this was a nice, simple, well-structured way of generating a character. I thought that it was a logical and quite user-friendly process to get from, here's your sheet, get filling in, and it took you through that quite nicely. Would you agree with that?
I thought it was very quick, very simple, and very limited. I think there's going to be a tendency as the game progresses and people earn more experience that people's characters will become more and more similar as certain kinds of things are more useful. So, everyone's probably going to end up with a bit of pilot, a bit of firearms, a bit of self-defense, a bit of awareness, a bit of athletics. Unless they're deliberately aiming to kind of gimp their character for kind of comedic purposes. And there's not a great deal of variation between your starting characters. So you think about something like, I don't know, let's go with Vampire again since we've been talking about that. So there you've got, your disciplines and your clans and the social structures that they all fit into. So that playing a Brujar is going to feel quite different from playing a Ventru. Mostly. D&D is very different. If you move from playing a rogue to a wizard, your play experience will be entirely different. You're going to have to learn a whole new way to play the game, basically. Whereas this, it's very much kind of, all of the characters will be broadly similar with slight variations on how good they are at particular tasks. So, again, fine for a one-shot, because you're not going to have all of your players learn a different playing style. Limited for replayability and long-term play. Neither of which I think the system is particularly fussed about, though. So, not necessarily a weakness based on the style of play that you would probably be playing this in.
Yeah, I think one of the things I noticed was that there were some flaws that you could take that would do nothing, and that if you've got Munchkin or Beardy players, as they're called, in your party, that they would fill themselves with flaws that really won't be to the detriment of the character, just to get a few extra points as well.
Yeah, you can certainly do that.
I think this plays into that section in the back when they talked about what kind of game they've aimed to create, really.
True.
They're not creating a game which is in that first bracket of that kind of simulationist. They're going for a much more cinematic, leaning towards the more narrative style of gaming, where your expectation as a player is to play your character, not worry about the points on your sheet.
Yeah.
You're not going to look to pick up lots of those other skills because your character realistically wouldn't. I think in the show, Kat is the pilot.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah. I think the other characters in that, if you look at the way they move through the series, you don't see them all starting to become the same person in terms of skills. So what you're seeing there is, if you're trying to mirror that, what you would do with your characters is you would just keep ploughing into the same things you already had, as opposed to branching out, because those weaknesses in a system like this is the weaknesses that define your character rather than their strengths a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And that's where the comedy comes from as well. It's that weakness, it's that failure. You fail at that role that really we've been through this before, Kat, over and over again. Why do you keep doing the same thing? And it's like, because that's who he is. And to kind of broaden yourself out too much is to kind of go against the theme of the game.
Yeah, that's probably true. What did you think about the secondary characters?
Well, I actually created one. I know you said to create a character.
Right.
But I actually created a primary and a secondary because I liked that idea so much.
Yeah, I did. I thought it was a really good idea. Perhaps a little underdeveloped, but I did really like it as an idea. Reminded me a little bit of like the kind of mage characters and grog characters in Ars Magica, where you explicitly have a very, very powerful character and an interesting but ultimately squishy, probably will die if they get anywhere near a bad guy character. And it just encouraged you to play different types of people, one that's really remarkable and one that isn't. And I think that was a really nice touch, but it was something that they could have perhaps developed a little more if it was something they were going to focus on.
Would you like to hear my secondary character?
Well, I think we're ready to talk about the characters that we've generated. Let's go with your secondary character first, and then we'll all go through with our main characters.
Okay, so the secondary characters, they're built on a much more restricted version of the rule set. So you get less points to spread into their main statistics, which there are 6 of: agility, dexterity, strength, perception, intelligence, willpower. Usually with a normal character, you get 20 points. With these ones, you only get 15. But the difference here is you're allowed to put a 0 in one of these as a secondary character, because there are some things they will automatically fail at. For instance, a secondary character can be like the talkie toaster. They're not going to have certain points in certain things. So my secondary character was originally, this is his backstory, was originally a Mechanoid 3000 unit who was not decommissioned. He's one of the ones that looked like humans. Largely, they were decommissioned because humans found them creepy. He wasn't decommissioned, and he snuck his way onto the ship as the ship's counselor, at which he excelled. Unfortunately, when the time jump happened, all of the skin on him atrophied and died, so that when the lone human came back out after the time jump, it looked like something out of Terminator, which, as the ship's counselor, is quite freaky. So after an arranged accident in the waste disposal unit, because the human found it too creepy to open up to, Lou, the Mechanoid 3000, managed to transfer its consciousness into the sanitation system aboard the ship and became a disembodied voice which inhabited all of the toilets on board. So now Lou gives advice through the toilet bowl whenever anybody is excreting. And
magnificent.
Has an agility of 0, a dexterity of 0, a strength of 0.
Because toilet.
Yes. A perception of 6, which is the highest that a secondary character can have, with a skill in empathy 5, specialised in psychiatry.
Nice.
An intelligence of 6, 1 point in culinary arts, because it used to be a mechanoid, and they all have culinary arts. 1 point in life sciences, 1 point in medicine, and 1 point in philosophy. Those long hours on the toilet, you need to talk about something. And 1 point in trivia, again, from being a mechanoid. A willpower of 3, quite strong will for having to deal with people shitting on you constantly. Assets of acute sense of smell +2. Unfortunately, every single turd that comes past Lou is appreciated for its waft. Liabilities, a compulsion of +2, must comment on past excretions. So whenever someone sits down and drops the kiddies off at the pool, Lou feels that they must talk to them about, what they've eaten, resulting in lines like, "Dave, what were you eating last night, Dave?" And as well as it leads to crew members running out of the toilets crying. Now, it used to be just because they'd eaten 2 Vindaloos and had 10 cans of cheap lager, but sometimes it's because they've had to open up on the toilet to loo. And yeah. So that's my secondary character.
That's magnificent.
That is good. I like that.
So, you mentioned that there was like the lone human. Have either of you created the lone human character, or are we going to imagine our role-playing group will have someone who's doing that?
I have not created a human. I've created a simulant.
I have not created a human either, so unless you have, let's imagine.
Neither have I. Of course I haven't. So we're going to assume that there's a fourth player in our group, and they have created the last human. Let's call him Dave. Would anyone like to go next with their character?
I'll go next.
Go on then.
So, I've created Callie. Callie is a simulant designed for a war that never happened, which everyone was very upset about. Callie, however, did see action and is trained in all the usual simulant arts of murdering humans and pretty much anything else she comes across. Callie, though, suffered a head wound during her engagement. It was an attack upon a governor's palace, and their attack happened while they were while the governor and his family were at dinner. And Callie was attacked by one of the bodyguards wielding a serving fork, which he jammed in her head, and has completely fritzed out several of the circuits that deal with her approach to violence. So Callie is now a pacifist who cannot stand violence, but still has the simulant's racial characteristic, where she often approaches situations through violence, which is basically her malfunctioning aggression chip. So Callie hates violence, hates the aftermath of violence, but periodically will respond with violence, at which she is frighteningly effective, only then to have huge kind of regrets and troubles afterwards. But she would much rather be home, tending to her garden, resting, reading, playing chess. So yeah, permanently chirpy, with the chirpy optimism behaviour tag. Has a nervous tic caused by her constantly malfunctioning system, and the two conflicting imperatives towards pacifism and homicidal violence. What else did I take? She has a moral restriction against killing people, which, given it's what she's really good at, and what half of her behaviour constantly leads her towards, she's basically going to be a bit of a wooby, kind of constantly on a kind of a moral downer from having engaged in some act of horrific violence.
I like that.
I like that too. Shall I go next?
Go for it.
Okay, so my character is called...
Because of course it is.
which is Kinitawawe for slightly above average but not particularly noteworthy flower.
Excellent.
She is the asexual daughter of a tribe chief of the Kinitawari, and she was traded for some Levi jeans. She's fiercely loyal to her husband, but is only interested in cuddles rather than sex. And obviously her husband is Dave, who is our other player that we don't know. Her goal is to protect her husband and be a good wife. And I've given her the assets courage and dumb luck. She also really, really, really likes cigars. So I've given her addiction 3, nicotine, gullibility and fanaticism to protect her husband. She's not very bright, but I think she would be a lot of fun to play. I've always quite liked playing dumb characters, but I like that she's dumb but with like a real motivation. And I've drawn a ridiculous photograph of her because she has a plaited beard, a big bouffant hairdo, and many piercings. And why wouldn't I want to draw that? When this episode goes out, I'll stick it on the Twitter. But yeah, she is quite min-max. She's got 6 in strength and 4 in endurance and strength feat, whereas the other stuff she's got 1s and 2s across the board and a 5 in perception. So yeah, she's very much the kind of character I would definitely like to play. She's dumb but fun, I think.
That is quite a lot of your characters, to be fair.
True, innit? What did you go for, Martyn?
I went for a dog.
A dog?
A dog character, yeah. His name is Fetch. He's age 3. He's, like Cat. He's quite human-looking, but he has very thin, kind of soft layer of fur, hair all over his body, which is kind of mottled black and white like a Dalmatian.
Right, good.
And he's got big, kind of soft, floppy dog ears and kind of big, brown, sad eyes.
Oh.
He was born on the ship among a litter of other dogs. Unfortunately, there was an accident aboard, so he's the last of his doggy kind. He's happy to have a human to be friends with. His goals are eat, poop, and sleep, with a minimum of 2 tail wags a day. That's an absolute minimum.
Solid life goals there.
He's got an innate sense of direction, so there was probably like a tracker or a retriever dog genes in there somewhere at some point. He's also got dumb luck, and it really is dumb luck, because he just happens to land right sometimes when things take a turn for the worse. I didn't take any of the liabilities because I was a little bit funny about a lot of them, but I did take some of the behaviour tags. I took nervous tick scratching.
Nice.
Whenever he gets a little upset or angry, he'll constantly be scratching behind his ears. And I also gave him the ritual of every time he sits in his pilot chair, because I took a pilot for him, he has to circle twice anti-clockwise and then twice clockwise before he sits down in the chair.
Good boy.
That's the same of any chair that he has to sit down in. He wants to be remembered for, because that's another section on there, being my man's best friend. And his tagline is, he's a good boy.
Oh.
I took agility 4 with like lots of skills in there. Dexterity 2. He's a bit of a puppy still. Kind of doesn't know where his paws are sometimes. Strength 2. He's not very strong. He's not really grown into his doggy strength, but he has quite a lot of those skills. So while he's not strong, he's actually quite good at like climbing and swimming and stuff like that. Doggy paddle, obviously.
Yeah.
Perception is very high, like your character, 6. With awareness 3, dogs get kind of bonuses to that, and he has an empathy of 1 because he understands his human. And I took social at 2. Because dogs actually get -2 to social checks because they're so kind of like scruffy and unkempt.
Aww.
That's kind of in reference to the episode with the dog in.
Yeah.
So I kind of cancelled that out by taking something, because I don't really see him as too much like that. So I took some skill points to kind of balance that out. Intelligence of 2, he is not the smartest puppy in the litter.
No.
And a willpower of 4. He's quite steadfast and he'll stand by his human. Yeah, so that's Fetch.
Oh, I want to fuss him already.
Yeah.
I just saw the dog and I was like, yes, that's what I want to do.
So we've got Dave, played by random player we don't know, with basically an asexual Gelf wife, a dog, and a psychopath with a fork in their head. How very Red Dwarf.
And a ship's counsellor that's the toilets.
True. I mean, as alternative Red Dwarf universes work, I think we've done pretty well there.
Yeah, I think that would work as a group.
Yeah. I'm surprised no one went hologram. Smeghead hologram.
Well, I thought that if died, then she could come back as like a hologram and have like horrible flaws about not being able to have cuddles.
Well, maybe that would be her thing, she's such a devoted wife and cares for Dave so much that she's arranged to return as a hologram in the event of her death.
True.
Because what would he do without her?
It's true. What would he do without her?
Yeah, I mean, the guy's a mess.
He is.
And then one of the episodes could be the search for the hard light drive so cuddles can come back on the menu.
That's true. Do you know what? I really want to play this game now.
We need to find an appropriately sarcastic Holly to run it for us.
We do.
It's the eternal problem with role-playing games, finding GMs.
Yeah.
That's true.
Too many players, not enough GMs.
Well, gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure going through the Red Dwarf RPG game with you. Where can people find you both on the internet? Ollie, what about you?
I'm a cipher. I don't exist on the internet. I think I have a Facebook page, but don't add me.
Okay, fine. How about you, Martyn?
You can find me at buttonsnupnup on Twitter. Generally following lots of RPG people, retweeting their stuff. Very occasionally politics, but I've gotten tired of that recently. Haven't we all?
If you're looking for me, it's at MarkAdamsHC on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to check out my other podcasts, at RITC Pod is Right in the Childhood, my podcast about kids' TV. There is also At Life's Milestones, which is my podcast about my job as a humanist celebrant and talking to a different guest about their life's milestones on that. And I'm also on At Tat Club, which is Super Tat Film Club, which is my podcast about B-movies. I like podcasting. Is that so wrong?
No, it's great. It's allowed me to come on here and talk about RPGs, which is possibly my favourite thing to talk about.
Good. Thank you so much for listening to Shipwrecked and Comatose, the Red Dwarf podcast, right here on the We Made This Podcast network. And until next time,
bye.
Cheerio.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod, and we are part of the We Made This Podcast network, which can be found online at wemadethispod.com or on Twitter at We Made This Pod.
Elsewhere on We Made This. The Movie Palace.
Just in very general terms, general thoughts, like, is this a good book? Is this something we would recommend that people go out and spend their hard-earned money on?
Well, if you're going to spend money on a book like this, which is a larger format, sort of like a coffee table book, but a little more compact, you want to look at the quality of it. I mean, the content, I think, is really good in terms of, the breadth and scope of it. It goes from 1921 to 1976. You really get a good range of letters and missives.
We dig music. Kayfabe, it's originally a wrestling term, but it gets used a lot in describing tropes in entertainment and that kind of thing.
Okay.
Basically, it's like staying in character. So it's like The Undertaker, if he met a kid doing a signing, he would stay in character as this, I'm a big scary goth guy. Whereas when he got home, he'd probably, put shorts and t-shirt on and, listen to the Bee Gees or whatever. And Manowar are one of those bands that kayfabe is sort of what they do.
Yeah.
So they're playing characters. Frame to frame.
Michael Jordan is clearly playing a version of himself, which is very hard for somebody to do on screen, especially when acting opposite nothing. But Bob Hoskins made it look extremely effortless when he was acting opposite the cartoons. And you look at even now, the Paddington films, they're acting opposite a tennis ball on a stick, that just for eye lines. So it can be done extremely well, but I think a lot of people will struggle. And I think clearly, as you mentioned, Michael Jordan struggles with that aspect of it.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This Podcast Network.